Hello, everybody. We are here in the shadows of Lambeau Field, folks, before the 2013 NFL Draft. I am Wes Hodkiewicz, joined alongside my boss, Mike Vandermause, and Packers beat reporter Pete Dougherty here at GreenBayPressGazette.com and PackersNews.com. Hours before the start of the 2013 NFL Draft. Now, Pete, it's going to be several hours, as far as it stands right now, until the Packers actually pick. In today's Green Bay Press Gazette, you mentioned if things stand as they are right now, you think they're going to be taking Eddie Lacy. 24 hours later, are you standing by that? And what do you like about him at that number 26 spot?
I didn't feel, him or Dayton Jones, defensive end from UCLA, of those two, I lean towards Lacy, even though it goes against Ted Thompson's history, generally the way he's conducted himself. I thought this is a year where he might break the mold. And from talking to, a couple scouts who I really trust, two guys both went that way, and they know. They study they study all the league, they study the Packers, they've studied Thompson's draft like they study all GM's drafts, and they thought that was the more likely of the two. It's a coin flip, and the draft is always really unpredictable. This one, it sure looks like it's even a hair more unpredictable than the rest, and we'll talk about this later, but the chances are just as good that they end up trading out.
Mike, looking at Pete's selection there, the Packers have not taken a running back in the first round since 1990 with Darrell Thompson. If they do it this year, obviously it would be a big move trying to help out that offense that really struggled in that capacity a year ago, at least finding consistent presence in the backfield. What do you think about that proposition of maybe getting a running back, taking one early, and hoping to get that bell cow back you can rely on for 16 games?
Now, Wes, if my math is right, that's 23 years since they picked a running back in the first round. That's a long time. So maybe they're due, but I tend to lean on the side of him. By the way, I heard it said this week, or maybe it was tweeted this week, that draft time is a time where sports reporters turn into weathermen because it is just a crapshoot, and we're the predictions are as unreliable as weathermen, I would think. Having said all that, they certainly could draft a running back. If they want to add another dimension to their offense. Personally, I don't think they will. I think Eddie Lacy, maybe his injury history might give me some pause. I also think their tremendous need at defensive line probably would make me think Ted Thompson will lean toward taking a defensive lineman. You look at the state of their line right now, basically you've got Jarrell Worthy, who's not going to be ready for training camp, probably won't be ready till the middle of the season. That position, you've got Ryan Pickett, who's basically on his last leg. This will probably be his last year. Mike Neal's unreliable. B.J. Raji's in the last year of his contract. So, they really have to bolster that position. So I would think if somebody's available, and Pete mentioned Dayton Jones could be a possibility. I think if Sylvester Williams from North Carolina is there, I think they would probably grab him. Chances are that he may be gone by the time it comes, for their pick to come up. But I would say, if I'm a betting man, I'm going to say Ted Thompson, push comes to shove, will go defensive line over running back.
Pete, looking at those needs, not just specifically what position it'll be, but in these first 2 days of the draft, they have 3 picks as it stands right now that could change if they do trade back. But what do they need to address in the first half of this draft as far as position-wise? Because as we've seen, Ted Thompson, that front office, they really make their hay right now with the draft, and they're not going to go out and find guys that just supplement and throw them in there.
Right. This is the main way they get better, almost the only way they get better. I think there's a pretty decent chance that in the first 3 picks in any order, they take a defensive lineman, a running back, and a safety. Now you can't rule out tackle. I think corner would be a little unlikely. Tackle, I guess, would be the other position that would fit up in there. And if there was a really good pass rusher who caught their eye, but those are rare to find in the second and third rounds. So I think there's a decent chance that somewhere in those first 3 rounds, D-line, running back, and safety.
Once again, folks, he's Pete Dougherty. Alongside Mike Vandermause, I'm Wes Hodkiewicz here for the Green Bay Press Gazette's pre-draft coverage of the 2013 NFL selection draft. And guys, you brought it up already, the fact that they could possibly trade out of this thing. I know, Pete, you and I both said 40% chance that maybe they could actually trade down and get out of the first round, try to get another pick there. They only have, I believe, 8 right now as it stands for the draft. What do you think about that, and is that something that you think this front office will be actively trying to do here in the starting hours of the draft?
It sure sounds like it because they may decide that they really do want a running back, but they might not like the value of Lacy at 26. You trade back into early in the second round, maybe you get Monte Ball or Jonathan Franklin. I know scouts think really highly of both those guys, especially Monte Ball. Despite the really bad 40 time he ran at the combine, 4.66, um, a strong majority of the scouts I talked to thought this guy could be a pretty good pro. So if the Packers are in that, then that could be a guy that could be their running back, and they can pick up an extra pick in the third round and move him back to get him. A lot depends on how many quarterbacks go before they pick at 26. If there's 0 or 1, I think there's a really good chance that somebody really early in the second round who needs a quarterback will trade up, and they'll want to get up. They have to get up ahead of the other teams that might want to trade up. And, 26, 27, 25, anywhere in there, that's probably where you're going to have to do it.
Yeah, and Tom Oates, our friend from the Wisconsin State Journal, also said it too. You have to look at number 33 there with Jacksonville. They're another team that's going to be looking for a quarterback. They're definitely probably not going to take one there at the number 2 spot. So we'll have to see how that one plays out. Mike, I know we're talking the draft here, and I want to keep it on the draft, but one thing that really came up this past, 24 hours was the fact that the Packers decided to move forward without DJ Smith, who's coming off of his ACL surgery. We don't really know when he's going to be back, where his rehabilitation stands, but still very strange considering that 2011 draft. They have a tackle right now, Derek Sherrod, who's only played in 5 career games because of he broke his leg in 2 different spots. Is it kind of interesting and odd that Ted Thompson would decide to give up on DJ Smith, considering, he actually had stepped into the starting lineup at the point in which he had that torn ACL?
Wes, I'd have to say I'm shocked that they let him go this quickly. I mean, take a look at this. Last September, DJ Smith is your starting inside linebacker after, Desmond Bishop went down. And you've got Brad Jones, who was a backup. Now we've got Brad Jones, who just got paid a huge contract, $3.75 million a year. And Smith gets tossed out on his ear. I'm just a little bit surprised in the fact that he didn't pass his physical, but they didn't expect him to at this point. But I just thought they would give him a chance to, go through the normal rehab process and, let him come back and see what he could do. And as his agent said yesterday, a lot of teams were knocking on his door, giving him calls. He wasn't bluffing there because he gets picked up today by San Diego. So that tells me that the guy has, some ability, and teams in the NFL thought that. I'm just surprised the Packers let him go so quickly.
Pete, to turn this back on you really quickly, also Brandon Sain also getting his release. As it turns out, kind of coincidence that he also tore his ACL in the same game against Houston. But with DJ Smith, what do you make out of that? I know when Lamont Smith, his agent, he even said, too, that from what he was told, they just started looking to get ready for something else. Whatever that may be, they need to create some space. What do you make out of that? And is this just something where the Packers decide to cut bait on a guy?
It did seem strange. I think, I guess one conclusion is they're just looking to get a little bigger and a little taller in the middle. I know, you run those zone blitzes, and if the middle linebacker's dropping into the middle, he was only 5'10" and 3/8 or 5/8. He was well under 6 feet. Bishop's is closer to 6'3". It's a harder guy to throw over. You don't think of it, on the football field because it's so expansive. It's not like the basketball court. The air's so open in football. But that makes a difference for some of those routes over the middle, just throwing over that guy. And I think that's one of the reasons why they like Brad Jones. I think the contract they paid Jones suggests to me they look at him as another Brandon Schiller type player. I am surprised they didn't keep Smith, though. I thought he'd probably be part of the rotation. They could work him into some packages next season. Obviously, they just it's kind of like maybe it was a Charles Woodson decision. They just thought it's time to move on. They got to get better there.
Yeah, he was only due $500,000 for this next year. I think he had a 580 cap number. So Packers decided to move on without him, though. But another guy that they've been looking at is Cedric Benson. He was back in here on Wednesday, Mike, to talk with the team. And evidently, things went pretty well from his perspective. He was tweeting about how much he enjoyed being back in Green Bay. Does Benson coming in for a visit, does that change anything at all for the Packers? Maybe looking at a running back of this draft, or what do you make out of him and, Ted Thompson bringing him in to take a look at him?
I don't think he factors into any decision they make in the draft. I mean, if there's a running back there that they want in a position where they're about to draft, I think they're going to grab him, regardless of Benson. Now, having said that, I don't think there's any harm in bringing him back. I mean, what do they have to lose? I mean, they can basically offer him a 1-year minimum salary deal. They will not risk anything. They can bring him to training camp. If he's not up to speed, they can just cut him and, cut their losses. There won't be any losses. So why not at least give it a shot, I say.
Benson will be, I believe, going on 31 next year, but still, he looked pretty good in those 5 games. I mean, as good as he could have, coming off basically a short training camp, and also, with that offensive line, that was kind of a working, bunch there at the beginning. Pete, were you impressed enough with Benson to think that the Packers could take another look at him going into this next season?
I mean, I'd agree with Mike that it's worth a look, but, to be honest with you, if they sign him, I'll be a little surprised if he makes it. They're going to draft a running back for sure. I just don't see how they don't. I personally don't see how they don't take one in the first 3 rounds. I mean, their running game has to get better to get teams out of that 2 deep shell. They also, I would think they're a good bet to sign an undrafted guy, and sometimes those guys make it. There's a decent chance that a 21-year-old undrafted guy at that stage in his career is a better player than Cedric Benson at 30. I mean, he's a year older now than he was last year. You can see last year he wasn't the back he had been 2 years ago or 3 years ago when he ran over the Packers at Lambeau, for instance. So he's a year older and coming off an injury. Yeah, I'd say it's less than 50-50 he'd even make the team.
Yeah, you have to remember last year the Packers finished the season with an undrafted free agent in DeJuan Harris, who wasn't on the active roster until December 1st. So those kind of things just kind of pop up nowadays. It seems like teams aren't really putting as much emphasis and as much value on the running back position as they used to, but we'll see how that one shakes out for Cedric Benson. Guys, we're bringing it back. I know how much you guys enjoyed this. We were doing our pre-game shows over at Skyline Park. Wes Hodkiewicz's world-famous over-under. I did a story this past week where the Packers have averaged 9.5 draft picks per year under Ted Thompson. This year they only have 8. My question for you is that 9.5, do you see them trading up and or trading back and getting some more picks, whether that's the first round or some other area, or do you see them standing pat with that 8?
I could see 9. I'm not thinking 10, so I'm thinking under if it's 9-5. You know, because one thing that could happen is, let's say they do a deal with that first-round pick and they get a 3 for it. They could use one of their 3s to move up higher in the second round with their second-round pick if there's somebody they really like. So then they're back to 8 picks again. I'm going to say under.
And I think if my memory serves me correctly, last year they traded up 3 times. They had a boatload of picks going in. I think they ended up only taking 8 guys. Mike, can throw the question back at you. They have 8 right now. 9.5, do you see them trading back and gaining some more?
Before I answer that question, Wes, I went back and did some research. I think I was accurate on like 82.5% of your over-under questions. I don't know what Pete's percent.
I'm glad you're looking at it.
But, you know, I'm pretty accurate here. I'm going to say over, that Ted Thompson trades back and he accumulates some extra picks. So just for the sake of being different than Pete, I'm going to say over.
All right. Well, last year, 6 consecutive picks on the defensive side. They finished the draft with 2 offensive picks with Andrew Dadko and B.J. Coleman in the 7th round. Defensive picks this year over under 4.5. To put you on the spot.
Over.
Over. Okay. Mike Vandermause, 4.5.
I have to reluctantly agree with Pete. Over. They'll have more defensive picks than offensive picks when all is said and done, I think.
Do you think this is something that will eventually wear on the offense, though? I mean, last year, obviously, they did have Don Barclay come in, play right tackle for him when they needed him. They brought in a guy like Jeremy Ross, who ended up being the kick returner when Randall Cobb had to do more offensive duties. But do you think this is something that could hurt them in the long run, though? You know, putting that much emphasis on the D-line or defensive side?
I mean, I guess theoretically it could. I mean, I think they feel pretty good about their offense right now, and so that's why they want to address the defense maybe and put so much attention there. But yeah, after a while, maybe that does catch up to you. You've got to strike that balance.
All right, well.
You can't do everything, Wes.
No, you can't. You can't. I'll let this one go. We'll end it there with that side of my entertainment. That's always my favorite part. I don't know. Maybe not yours, but I enjoy it. Pete, one thing I wanted to talk to you about here as we get down the final stretch. This year, there are a lot of numerous controversial kind of prospects in this draft, whether it is a Manti Te'o who's just had some, situations that really aren't related to drugs or anything like that, just an off-the-field kind of area. I don't even know how you describe it, just with what happened with him and his fake girlfriend. Then you have a guy like Tyrann Mathieu, who, had failed 10 drug tests when he was at LSU. The Packers have shown in the past they're willing to take chances on guys. Usually it's as undrafted. But, I mean, what do you think about the proposition of maybe bringing in one of those kind of guys, whether it is a Te'o or just one of those kind of guys that have some character risk going into a draft like this?
I don't see Ted Thompson touching Te'o with a 1,000-mile pole just because of the media circus. I mean, you're probably asking for something akin to, at least for a little while, like Tim Tebow. And why put that on your team, especially if you're Ted, who he's obviously very sensitive to what happens in the locker room and to having harmony in there. I don't see them touching him. Mathieu he's short. They usually don't go after defensive backs. I think 5'10.5" is their cutoff. I think he's like 5'9" or 5'8" something. So that alone could be the cutoff. That's too many positives. I don't think they would touch him either.
Do you think DJ Smith, them getting rid of him, I know I went into this draft thinking inside linebacker, that's a position, it may not be perfect, but it's pretty well set. Do you think that him being cut could open up the door for them bringing in an inside guy?
It could. Remember they have Terrell Manning, and they thought highly enough of him to move up and pick him last year, and I think back to Brian Williams back in '96. I think they drafted him in '94, and his first 2 years he did nothing. They were ready to cut him in camp in '96 because he hadn't done anything. He'd been hurt, hadn't played well. He ended up being a starter and a fairly important player on their Super Bowl championship team. So, it's a little early to write off, a guy like, who am I thinking of? Manning. Yeah, it's definitely too early to write off Manning. So, that's another possibility there, too. If they took one with a 7th rounder, no surprise there.
Mike, and maybe not if they're just going to draft him, but what do you think about those guys that do have characteristics? Obviously, and again, as I said, they brought in guys. Desmond Moses had some off-the-field things when he was at Iowa. Sam Shields, those sort of things. But what do you think about them actually? The proposition of drafting a guy like that. Do you think that's something that Ted Thompson would ever be interested in?
Thompson always talks about wanting Packer people, but that doesn't mean that they have to have squeaky clean records. I think last year there were a couple of their draft picks that had a couple of arrests in their background. I don't think that necessarily scares Ted Thompson away. I'm sure he does his due diligence, checks up on these guys, but, I think he's willing to cut him some slack. I mean, you look at Corn Robinson, he was willing to bring him in, and he had a long record, of mistakes. And so I don't think that will nullify Ted taking one of those guys, but it has to be the right person. So I guess we'll wait and see how that shakes out.
Yeah, and they didn't bring in, you look back a few years ago now to Marshawn Lynch, they didn't bring him in, but they took an honest look at him, so obviously they are willing to give guys second chances. If the price is right and if the value is right, obviously Thompson this past week talked so much about that and what that means to this team. Pete, in closing here, I just want to touch on the picks that the Packers have had under Thompson going back to the 2005 season. Obviously, it started off with a bang with Aaron Rodgers. I wrote a story this past week, that they've had 76 picks. They've kind of dominated the NFC North in comparison to how the other three teams have done. From the outside looking in, what have you thought of the job they have done? I know there's been some bad picks. You talk about the Justin Harrells, the Brian Brohms of the world, but overall, what have you thought of what Ted Thompson has done as far as building a foundation here?
Oh, well, I think overall he's been a real good drafter. I would say if you took all the GMs in the league over his, 8 years, he's got to be in the top 5. Rodgers alone would, help get him there. But, Greg Jennings is a really good pick. I mean, they've landed a lot of good guys. His high picks, Clay Matthews, that's a home run. That's a grand slam, a double grand slam. If you look at his record and Ron Wolf's record, and Ron Wolf was an excellent GM, Thompson's is better in the first round for sure. Wolf might have done a little better in the 3rd through 5th or 6th rounds, but Ted, he loves the draft and he studies it hard, and he's put together a team that can contend every year basically just by doing it through the draft.
Mike, we've obviously seen they still have yet to bring in an unrestricted free agent. They have 4 street free agents that they've brought in. This draft here over the next 3 days, can this be what the Packers need to get them over the top to get back in that NFC title and Super Bowl picture?
I have a feeling that Thompson is going to do a little bit of shopping after the draft. There's a lot of veterans out there that can be had for a pretty reasonable price. I think he'll probably look around, maybe pick through the scrap heap and find a player or two that he'll bring in just to strengthen a position maybe that he isn't able to address in this draft. So I think there's still some personnel moves to be made after this weekend.
Pete, last question for you. I want to ask you, you've looked at this draft, you've analyzed, you've talked to a lot of people over the past month. Just looking at the draft as a whole, you've talked about Melnick, Watson, some of these other guys. Is there anyone that just intrigues you that whether they're drafted by the Packers or not, you're interested to see how they do, as their NFL career goes on?
Oh, a lot of them do. You know what? A guy who I'm curious to see how he does is Jarvis Jones, the outside linebacker from Georgia. He had 14 and a half sacks last year, 12 and a half the year before, something like that. Puts up, really nice sack numbers, very quick, good pass rusher. Ran a horrendous 4.92 40 for a guy who's, 250 pounds, if that. I'll be curious to see what kind of NFL player he is, and you always have to balance what you see on video with how these guys test and what you see as their athleticism. And sometimes a playmaker is a playmaker, regardless of what the stopwatch says.
Definitely. Well, we'll see if all that research gets thrown out of the window or what they do here. Last year was a pretty active year for trades in the NFL. Have to see how this year's draft shuffles out. But once again, for Pete Dougherty, that's Mike Vandermause. I'm Wes Hodkiewicz. Be sure to stay tuned to PackersNews.com throughout the night. Myself, Pete, Mike, Rob Domofsky, and Jordan Schnelling back at the Press-Gazette will also be helping us out with our Cover It Live. And for Jim Matthews behind our camera today, be sure to check out all those fun little notes that we'll have on PackersNews.com. And until next time, we'll see you later.